Some of you guys know by now that I'm a challenge runner at heart. Banging my head against the wall for 3, 4, 5 hours is a mark of enjoyment for me.
Bro, you're trash, bro. Is them tears, bro? Come on, bro. You gotta get you together, boy. An interception. I wasn't even playing. I was wiping your tears off, bro. Bro, where you going, bro?
This episode won't be like my previous Crucible Knight analysis where I go in depth into the moveset, nor will it be like my boss design video where I explain why this game is getting way too much undeserved criticism from the community, and as a Souls player myself, why I think Elden Ring has the best bosses, even if we were to add Sekiro into the equation. Since when you type in Elden Ring bosses on YouTube, all you will most likely see are these criticism videos where the conclusion repeatedly resolves to the bosses suck, Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro are simply better. But I would passionately disagree. You might think bosses like Morgott or Malenia doesn't have exploitable weaknesses and it forces you to wait around until their combos are over, but this is actually false. Miyazaki not only designed these bosses very fast, nimble, and aggressive, but also made sure that you can constantly punish them in between their combos. In terms of speed, you don't need to be a samurai to keep up with them. This is a reliable way to consistently posture break the bosses multiple times throughout the fight. See, unlike in Souls Trilogy, you need to actively create your own openings in Elden Ring, not just wait for them. That's when the flow and the rhythm clicks. But the catch is you don't have to play this way. Miyazaki is not forcing you to do anything. Complete freedom and build variety is the name of the game. You can always do it like Dark Souls, where you simply dodge and wait for your turn to attack, to find the safest of punish windows. But I would suggest to you that this game is not Dark Souls. You'll have to wait for a long time to get your safe opening. The boss AI is simply not designed that way. Nor is this like Sekiro, where the game is entirely designed around the parrying mechanic and a single weapon. As fun as Sekiro's mechanics are, the flow of these fights may not be as chaotic and interesting as you might initially remember them. All of these bosses have very specific parry requirements, and even if they're a challenge to learn, once you do learn them, they kinda lose their edge. Ishin no longer feels like this unpredictable and formidable opponent, but a predictable rhythm game where all you do is to see the signs and press the parry button. You don't need to worry about spacing, nor which directions to dodge, nor openings for that matter, as everything you need to do is clearly telegraphed. If the blade is drawn, your best option is to parry. A lower swipe attack, better jump. A thrust attack, you need to Mikiri counter. You don't have flexibility in options. Spacing and directions are kinda thrown under the bus, while Elden Ring asks you to intuitively sense if the boss is close to a posture break by being constantly aggressive. No bar is visible. You can't use aggression as a clutch. Furthermore, you need to decipher the complex moveset relative to your positioning. Find a directional dodge that works for your weapon out of multiple available to you for any given boss attack. Find a suitable attack that doesn't lead you getting punished, and then have enough stamina left to respond to the next attack. This Elden Ring flow is simply not replicable in Sekiro or Dark Souls. There are multiple ways to punish the bosses, and they have countless unintuitive openings if you know what you're doing. Which is precisely why this tier list will include an S+ tier, where some of these bosses are so high quality that it would be a disservice to not have a premium segment, as S+ is the highest tier, symbolizing not only the boss moveset is incredible, but also there is something very memorable about the theme or the design of the fight, something that personally made me surprised, excited, or unusually impressed. While F is the lowest tier, symbolizing not only the boss moveset is bad, but also there's a gimmick or a quirk that annoyed me to no end. So let's start a conversation with Margit, the most complex first boss in From Software's catalog. And for good reason. This is a very memorable and well put together boss that took like 4 to 5 hours to figure out as a low-level wretch on my first playthrough. I refused to go and explore, and Margit has shown me the sort of challenge that I should expect from the rest of the lineup. He taught me the mechanics like jump attacks, roll R1s, directions, charge attacks, and spacing. Everything I had to know to master the bosses resided here. All I had to do was to observe and experiment with different levels of aggression and different directional dodges. Margit has a special place in my heart for teaching me the game, so it is easily going on the S+ tier for me. Never seen a better first boss in any game, and more likely won't until Miyazaki cooks his next masterpiece. The next one on the list is Leonine Misbegotten. Although not as challenging as Margit, it was still a mechanically enjoyable boss. Due to my low vigor, I actually died a lot more than I thought. I used a Claymore +2 to defeat him, and Castle Morn was a fun mini dungeon, and I think this was a nice way to cap it off. Even though we see this guy later into the game, this is the best way to fight him, considering you will probably have low enough stats for it to be at least a little challenging, but most importantly, his defeat rewards the Tarnished with the Game of Thrones blade. Grafted Blade Sword was my main until I came across Ruin's Greatsword in the Redmane Castle. How weird both of them include a Misbegotten in the fight. He's definitely going on the B tier. The next one is Godskin Noble. For a fat boss, I think he was really nimble, quick, and interesting. I really like him. His belly attack is a bit hard to react to. I enjoyed his weird rolling around move, paying his respects to Sonic the Hedgehog. His moves were well telegraphed, and the sort of rhythm you find with a precise play was very enjoyable. However, is it so good that it's a step up from the B tier? I don't think so. It is definitely better than Leonine Misbegotten, but not quite deserving of A tier for me. Very close nonetheless, a great addition to the boss lineup. The next one is Elemer of Briar. Very well designed boss. His usage of levitating swords to attack and then retrieve the blades trying to catch you off guard was a very smart play by him. I also enjoyed his shield bash attack along with his rhythmic swings. I just wish he had a bit more health overall for this phase of the game. His overall vibe felt very unique, and although he has very low HP, I do enjoy the mechanics of him well enough that he's basically Godskin Noble tier for me. Very close to A tier, but not quite there yet, so B tier it is. The next one is Godrick. As much as I love this boss, I think it was a mechanical step down from Margit. I used my Claymore +2 to defeat him, and I remember enjoying everything about the fight. But nothing other than his dragon hand breathing fire stuck with me that much. Maybe his whirlwind attack comes off a little too fast for you to react as a melee build, but in my playthrough I didn't have an issue as an aggressive melee player. I also thought his delayed swings and ground attacks were really satisfying to learn their timings. His insane breakdancing move comes to mind, but at the end of the day, none of these moves quite give me that mechanical puzzle Margit has given me prior. Godrick is definitely an easier puzzle, which doesn't always mean it's a bad puzzle, but because of that, Godrick deserves a solid A tier from me. If he had a bit more depth in his moveset and came before Margit, he would easily be an S tier boss. Regardless, Godrick is such a well-made fight that I have no direct criticisms I can give. The pacing, the HP, the music, the arena, the design, it was all incredible. The next one is Red Wolf of Radagon. I think this was a nice boss fight for sure, but I don't think his moveset was all that interesting, to be honest. I enjoyed his projectiles and jumping around, but it wasn't quite on the level of Leonine Misbegotten for me. However, it is still a nice boss that definitely deserves a B tier. Maybe a low B tier, but not a C tier in my book. It was definitely a fun and enjoyable mini-boss. The next one is Placidusax. Although I have some issues with it, This is probably my favorite dragon fight in the entire series, and I say this as someone who doesn't like dragon fights at all. I don't find them mechanically enjoyable or interesting except for Placidusax. Some of the things that annoy me is the long run back towards the boss each time you die, and I think he has a little bit too much health for my liking. I don't think his moveset variety was tuned well enough for such a big HP bar. But even with these drawbacks, it is undeniable how beautiful the setting is. The teleportation ability, his golden fire, flying towards us, the idea of fighting an ancient Elden Lord. As a package, it creates an extremely memorable and interesting dragon fight. In fact, the best one in my opinion. But a dragon fight is still a dragon fight, so it goes on to the last place on the A tier. I enjoyed this fight way more than I thought I would. The next one is Renalla. I'm gonna be honest here, this is my least favorite main remembrance boss in the game. I have nothing against the lady, but the first phase is a literal waste of my goddamn time, not only mechanically, but also time-wise. There is no Marika statue in close proximity, which makes sense because Renalla doesn't like Marika in the slightest, lore-wise at least, but the gameplay repercussions is running for 3 minutes towards the boss each time I die, and then going through this waste of time first phase with books being thrown around, and trying to break her barrier with these radiant students. The second phase is certainly much more interesting, but her sorcery has the power to one-shot you if you make a mistake, which means you have to do the entire thing from scratch. And since I had very low vigor to begin with, it was a very frustrating fight. But to give credit where it's due, it was pretty epic when she started to summon a huge dragon and various mini-bosses to her aid, not even counting the beautiful moon backdrop with a larger-than-life arena. I think Renalla is a memorable fight, but memorable for the wrong reasons. I'm not a purely spectacle person, so that's why this is going on the D tier for me. Atmosphere is good, the setting is good, but I simply need more mechanical depth in my boss battles. The next one is Regal Ancestor Spirit. I will rank both of them straight up. Not a huge fan of these fights, they do look interesting, but just like Renalla, I find the moveset lacking and not on par with the rest of the lineup. D tier it is, both of them are going below Renalla. The next one is Commander Niall. Now, this was a very interesting fight. I really enjoyed it. I personally didn't have issues getting rid of his spirit soldiers with my Ruin's Greatsword, and his combos along with his lightning kicks were very interesting and fun to play around with. Seeing this guy again after the Khalid fight certainly reduces the uniqueness of the boss, but this is true for many other fights. This is overall a very solid B tier fight, and a great addition to the lineup. I really enjoyed it. The next one is Godfrey Spirit. Although this was an okay fight, it was still a gimped version of the real thing, so it is going on C tier for me. It was a relatively easy fight and didn't have enough mechanical variety for me to put it on B tier, unfortunately. The next one on the list is the Giga Chad Radahn. This guy is one of the most insane and epic fights in the game. I was 25 vigor when I fought him with my grafted blade sword, and I didn't use any of the NPCs thrown around, and decided to level the playing field for him by playing solo. And the funny thing is that I had no idea I could summon Torrent, meaning I had to figure out the exact direction to run towards when Radahn's meteor phase kicks in, an attack that one-shots you if you're not precise. So if you were to back up and think about this, Radahn is a fantastic boss because this is literally a mini adventure. Your first job is to dodge these arrows and approach him. Unlike in Renalla's runbacks and waste of time first phase, this is so much better. As by mastering the timings here, you can have much more flasks left for the remainder of the fight. After that, you need to understand Radahn's swings. I think this is one of the values of colossal weapons and Souls games. Whenever you encounter these sort of half giant and big bosses, usually a long weapon that can do sideways swings is very useful in reducing spacing related annoyances. Not that Radahn can't be aggressively attacked with an S-stock for instance, and be posture broken that way, but considering the existing level of challenge on a blind playthrough, I think Radahn is a great fit for colossal weapons. And remember, once the meteor attack kicks in, I have to look up at Radahn and start to running in a particular direction to dodge the area of attack damage. I was always running in the wrong direction, and I didn't know Torrent can be summoned in this fight. Once I figured out where to go, the final phase had its moments, with those meteor attacks and Radahn jumping towards you. All of that was very magical. This entire fight was me fighting a very formidable opponent, and it felt like a mini adventure for me. I can't even begin to describe how satisfied I felt after 4 to 5 hours of practice and finally defeating Radahn solo. There are no ifs or buts. This is an easy S+ tier boss, one of the greatest in the entire From Software catalog. The next one is the Spirit Loretta. Since this is another gimped fight, it's going on the C tier for me, right below Spirit Godfrey. It was an okay fight and nothing to write home about. The next one is Lichdragon Fortissax. This boss has an incredible soundtrack. That I completely agree with, and I know that a lot of you guys really enjoy this fight. But contextually speaking, my playthrough was a bit different, as I completely missed this encounter in my first blind playthrough, and was only able to fight him after completing Placidusax. Because of that contextual difference, the effect of the fight wasn't as strong as it could be. I wasn't as impressed after Placidusax. Furthermore, I've told you guys my disappointment with dragon fights as a whole, and although the music is a banger, I'm not a huge fan of this fight personally, so this is going on the very end of the B tier. I still enjoyed it well enough that it's not a C tier fight, but certainly not on the level of A tier. The next one is Maliketh. Definitely one of the best fights in the game. See, this was the fight that made me question my 25 Vigor playthrough, as in, I've played the rest of the experience on 25 Vigor or lower, meaning I was always dying in 1 or 2 hits. At this point in time, I couldn't defeat Malenia with 25 Vigor, so I skipped her, but I've defeated every other boss I've encountered. And even though I had extremely close calls with Maliketh with this build, his HP draining effect was starting to wear me down. I think more importantly, this was a bit of a psychological issue in the sense that Malenia before, with my low vigor build, sapped my enthusiasm so much that I was very annoyed. We will get to Malenia soon, but I also had these lower back pains right at this moment while I was fighting Maliketh, which reduced my tolerance levels. After about 3 to 4 hours of practice on Maliketh, I realized I have to increase my vigor to a normal level, like 45 or 50 going forward. And once I did that, I had much more flexibility when it comes to mistakes or slight inaccuracies. Now Maliketh's HP drain was no longer an issue because my HP is no longer so low. Looking at the actual fight, I know a lot of people criticize Beast Clergyman for being too fast. However, his unusual speed works extremely well with a precise play. Just like all the bosses, he has countless openings. In fact, he had openings that I wasn't even conscious of after 4 to 5 hours of practice. I was watching this guy on YouTube who was using the Great Club, and he had found a sick punish window where he was calmly walking backwards a few steps just when he drops his dagger on the ground and starts a charged R2 just in time to punish him. I had no idea such a punish window was possible directly facing all of those attacks. Furthermore, his fast swings are countered by a combination of rolls and jump R2s. And after you get his HP low enough, now Maliketh confronts you. It was absolutely epic to see this transformation finally equipping the Destined Death, and his crazy attacks jumping around and delayed explosions were really fun to figure out. As usual, the plan is to stay aggressive and posture break him as often as possible. While I got the final hit, I was really satisfied and happy with this fight. The developers knew that both of these fights had their own respective challenges, so they purposefully reduced the HP of Maliketh to balance it out. and they did a fantastic job, which is why this is going on an easy S+ tier, one of the best of From Software's offerings. The next one is Dragonkin Solider. I think this was overall a pretty good fight. Dodging his attacks might be challenging, but it was pretty manageable despite it being a semi-giant boss. It was mechanically interesting and didn't overstay his welcome, which is why he's going on B tier. The next one is a Twin Gargoyle Duo fight. Let me make it clear that as a Souls player, I don't like gang fights. However, Twin Gargoyle fight was probably one of my all-time favorites, which is a really weird thing to say, and I'll tell you why. Most people don't like this boss. In fact, when I actually encountered these guys, I was again 25 vigor, and they were probably the hardest boss up until that moment. These guys were absolutely brutal. One of the advantages of playing like me is that having low vigor means you have more points you can dump into your preferred attack stat, which was strength for me. My damage per hit with this grafted blade sword was extremely satisfying, which enabled me to get the first gargoyle's HP to about 25% before the second one even arrived on the scene. This means I had one-on-one practice session with the first gargoyle, more or less mastering his moveset. Then a small period of time where I was trying to juggle both of them until I can smoke the rest 25%, which leaves me with a 101 with the second gargoyle. This flow was actually fantastic. This is what I want from gang fights. I want them to be semi-gang fights, not entirely. I value my 101 duels a lot, and this fight was able to give me that. I experienced the thrill of juggling two enemies, but also spent majority of my time learning individual movesets 101. I was also impressed how the second gargoyle is as mechanically challenging as the first one. He had new moves and wasn't just a copy-paste of the first one. I can see the poison being a bit of a problem, but again, due to aggressive play, I got rid of the first gargoyle pretty fast. After all, that's the entire point of this encounter. From Software is not stupid. They have intentionally delayed the arrival of the second gargoyle so that you can reduce as much HP as possible of the first one. If you play passively and slowly, you will be left with two giant HP bars, two incredibly aggressive and challenging enemies for that phase of the game. Unless you're over-leveled, this fight is going to be a huge pain. So, I hope you can see how Miyazaki is subtly trying to encourage a bit of aggressiveness by delaying the second gargoyle's arrival. Even though I praise the fight, its nature being a gang fight nonetheless will affect its ratings in my mind. Even though this is one of my favorite gang fights, it's still a B tier fight for sure. Especially considering most people won't play in the particular way that I've experienced them my first playthrough. And even if they did, I much prefer no gimmicks 101 mechanically rich fights to any gang fight. But if From Software is adamant in continuing the trend of gang fights, they should always delay the arrival of the second opponent, just like this one. The next one on the list is Mohg. Mohg is definitely one of the best bosses in the game. He's a fairly challenging boss. His attacks are fair, well telegraphed, and most importantly, he's one of those opponents that inherently nudges you in the direction of close combat for melee players. If you try to space out too much, he will constantly spam and annoy you with his blood flames. His openings are very obvious. Each swing gives you ample time to attack in between his combos. However, the length and the duration of the fight is hard to keep up with. I was again 25 vigor, meaning I was dying in 2 hits. So I had to not get hit and save my flasks until his transition phase. This is a very cool and memorable moment which sets him apart from the rest of the bosses. I really enjoyed his increased aggression and new moves added to his attacks, and blood flames being everywhere, introducing a tinge of chaos added into the mix. And when I beat him with my Rune's Greatsword after like 3 to 4 hours of practice, I remember screaming with joy and happiness in my room. He was definitely hard to play on 25 vigor my first playthrough, and it was so damn satisfying to defeat him. Easily going on the S+ tier, one of my all-time favorites. Let's also get the fake Mohg out of the way. Another gimped fight that reduces the uniqueness of the real thing, but by the time I fought him, I thought it was alright. Even though he had a bit of a simpler moveset, he gets the job done as a mini-boss, so he goes at the end of B tier for me. The next one is Mimic tier. I'm gonna be honest here, this was a gimmick fight, no real challenge, no mechanical depth, one of the worst remembrances for sure, but the idea was still interesting. You're fighting a much less powerful mirror version of yourself, so because of that idea, I'll put him on the end of E tier. The next one is Loretta. Overall, I think this is a solid fight. Some people say it is way too similar to the Tree Sentinel, but I don't think so. She has her own style and is not just a carrion version of a Tree Sentinel. It does reduce the uniqueness factor to see her so late game when you're probably seeing the spirit form, but nonetheless, she definitely deserves an easy B tier from me. The next one is Morgott. And this is the moment where I need to be much more precise by explaining the difference between an S tier boss and an S plus tier boss. See, Morgott is an easy S plus tier boss on purely mechanical terms. His attacks, the way he combines those attacks, the flow of the fight, his aggression, absolute perfection. One of the best fights in the entire series. But remember what I told you before. An S plus tier boss needs to not just excel mechanically, but also needs to do something interesting, unique, or surprising, either thematically or contextually. If you look at all the S plus tier bosses here, they all did something interesting and unique on top of being mechanically rich. Radahn's entire setup, flow, and execution was very unique. Mohg's Niall in second phase transition was extremely memorable. Maliketh was similarly a very surprising and interesting boss with Beast Clergyman and Destined Death transitions. And Margit was maybe not thematically but contextually a mind-blowing boss. I've never seen such a high quality boss moveset as a first main boss in any game. He was also very memorable, putting my foolish ambitions to rest. While Morgott doesn't quite have these qualities, unfortunately. He's as good as all these S plus tier bosses mechanically, but he misses that thematic or contextual edge, which is why he's an S tier boss. His design is the exact same as Margit, obviously, and nothing inside the fight is helping me remember it in a particular way outside of his mechanics. However, he's at the very top of S tier. Learning to dodge his insane combos and posture breaking him left and right was an incredible experience that I hope it will be replicated in some way in the DLC. I really love these mechanically rich fights, and they're just my type of bosses. Whomever designed Morgott mechanically gets a thumbs up from me. I hope he was given more work on the DLC bosses. Leading up to the next boss on the list, Astel. I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. I don't like this fight. I agree with everyone that Astel is a cool looking boss, but mechanically, he's just not doing it for me. It's just not good enough. It feels very gimmicky for melee players. It's very hard to hit him. His attacks are not fun to dodge, and I'm a player that rarely gives slack to bosses just because they're cool looking. So this is going on E tier. Not a boss type that I look forward to seeing in the DLC for sure. Basically the opposite of Morgott. The next one is Magma Wrym, another boss that I'm not super into. I guess he's fine as a mini-boss, but all these lava and fire everywhere, and the overall pacing of the fight, even if you're aggressive, is kinda rubbing me the wrong way. It was definitely more solid than a D tier fight, so it's going on the very end of C tier for me. Leading to Radagon. What a fight, Miyazaki. If only you didn't put that annoying space balloon at the second phase, because Radagon had the potential to be a greater boss. His pacing and speed were very well balanced. His aggression was very good. His delayed teleportation required the player to answer by a similar delayed dodge, which was a very interesting dynamic not often employed mechanically. Him using Marika's hammer, all the lore implications, just everything about this fight screams S plus tier. But the HP of Radagon was noticeably gimped because you will fight this space balloon without a checkpoint. But I want you to imagine how Radagon would be like in his second phase. maybe he would shapeshift into Marika, his other self, and we would fight with her with a completely new moveset. The coolness of this entire fight would be massively enhanced. Radagon and Marika, fighting them back to back, not just mechanically but lore-wise as well, this would make perfect sense. Which is why, unfortunately, Radagon is going on S tier. Let's now talk about the Elden Beast. Although my current opinions on the Elden Beast is certainly a bit more positive than my first playthrough, I still think this was a mistake overall. This was not the best way to cap it off. At least give me a fully fledged Radagon and Marika boss fight, then let me save the game and then give me the Elden Beast as a standalone fight. If Miyazaki did that, I would be much more sympathetic to Elden Beast. But as it stands, Elden Beast merely blemishes the mechanical depth of Radagon. I don't want to run for 100,000 kilometers just to get a few hits into the space balloon, only for it to run to the opposite side, which again forces me to run for 100,000 kilometers just to get a few hits in. Not even counting how some of his moves are very hard hitting and punishing. Coming from Radagon without a checkpoint, he was definitely more frustrating than hard. But I also can't fully deny that once I defeated him, I did experience a sense of deep joy and happiness for completing the game. So I want to make that very clear that I wasn't stuck on this boss for a very long time or anything. And I can see some of his merits with dodging all those projectiles and the overall spectacle. It is just not good enough for me mechanically when he is moving around so much, so often, which is why he's unfortunately on F tier. Context matters. He shouldn't have been coming after Radagon without a checkpoint, and shouldn't have gimped the Radagon fight unintentionally. The next one is Rykard. A lot of people really enjoy this fight, and I do think he's one of the best spectacle gimmick fights that I've seen, but you probably know what I'm gonna say. As much as a spectacle Rykard is, you're doing some spacing related adjustments and pressing the attack button. That's it. Furthermore, when you're 25 vigor, which is how I was, Rykard can kill you much more easily than you think, which forced me to upgrade the Serpent Hunter just so that I can dish out damage a little bit faster. I think that Rykard had a bit too much HP for my liking, but overall I don't deny the allure of the fight. It's a very cool boss, but it's going on the C tier for me. The next one on the list is Godfrey. I think my only real issue with Godfrey is that he's playing it a little too safe. The openings are well telegraphed, but a little too well telegraphed. It feels too much like a turn-based dodge attack formula, which is not a bad thing, but when all of the attacks are so clearly telegraphed, it takes away some of the enjoyment that resides in, let's say, Morgott, where you need to figure out that very small opening, asking yourself, how am I going to exploit that long combo? When it comes to Godfrey, everything is clean, but it's a little too clean. It lacks a bit of chaos. Even though the second phase is trying to add that chaos, it was still overall an easier fight compared to the rest of the lineup. It felt like his HP was a little low for this stage in the game. So because of these reasons, I think Godfrey is a solid A tier boss, very much on the ballpark of Godrick. Nothing crazy spectacular, but you can't also deny the existing level of quality and polish in his design. Godfrey, even feeling a little bit too safe at times, was a great fight, and I really enjoyed it. The next one is Fire Giant. See, this one is not like Astel, where I can give it some slack for being an optional boss, nor is it like Elden Beast, where at least Radagon is redeeming the memory a little bit. Fire Giant is a straight up F tier fight. As a main boss, I can't skip it. Cheesing him is hard. His attacks can be very hard to see and react. There is little to no mechanical depth anyways. I can't see what I'm doing. I'm mostly looking at his feet anyways. And most of his attacks can one-shot you. He has a lot of HP. His projectiles in the second phase also doesn't cut me some slack. Overall, this is an extremely annoying boss. Whatever redeeming qualities he has with his lore and second phase transition is not even remotely enough to balance the low quality experience he provides. Somehow an even worse remembrance boss than Elden Beast. Congratulations, Miyazaki. Let's now talk about the Godskin Duo. I know that this boss is getting a lot of hate within the community, and I do understand the hate for the most part. But I don't know if it was because of my build or my playstyle. I defeated them with my Rune's Greatsword almost first try. I think I reduced their collective HP to 15% before I died, but since I don't like the flow of the fight, I summoned a Mimic Tier for the first time and completely destroyed them on my second try. It wasn't that they were hard, but not quite well balanced as a gang fight. I definitely don't hate them as much as most people do, but I don't want to see anything like this in the DLC. So because of this, it is going on D tier. They're annoying, but surprisingly for me, not that annoying. Now I'm gonna do a bonus analysis here. Even though Crucible Knight Evergel is not a remembrance boss, I just want to rank him because he has absolutely blown me away in my recent Crucible Knight analysis. So if you want to understand all of my thoughts on this guy, you gotta watch this analysis video. Especially don't miss the final section where I actually start to understand how to punish his weaknesses. My ranking for this guy is probably the highest you will ever see a Crucible Knight will ever get in any tier list. Mechanically speaking, I've never seen a such well-crafted side mini-boss. In fact, I think it's a disgrace to call him a mini-boss. His moveset complexity and aggression rivals all the other S+ tier bosses. He has insane resistance to posture breaking, which requires even more aggression from my part. Now, I understand if you fought the Crucible Knight Evergel kinda over-leveled, you kinda missed your chance. This is specifically tuned for very low level players and requires a very strong understanding of the gameplay mechanics to stay toe to toe answering all of his attacks. I was not expecting such a boss here in the slightest. He definitely deserves an S+ tier, one of the strongest and most skilled swordsmen in the lands between. And now is the time that you were all waiting for.
And I have never known defeat.
It is time to talk about the infamous Malenia, the Blade of Miquella. What do I really think about this boss? I will make a separate combat analysis video on Malenia. But before you point out, I already watched Malenia Doesn't Play by the Rules video attempting to explain why she's unfair on a mechanical level, by saying animation interruption and animation commitment being the primary bulk of his argument. I'll address this much more in my video, but to not leave you hanging, this person is basing his entire argument on mob level normal enemies and how From Software has designed their hyper armors, poise, and stance break logics. Designing a fully fledged boss battle and a normal enemy requires completely different logics and modifications. For instance, you can take a normal enemy hyper armor logic and apply it to Malenia and then say, look, Malenia is not playing by the game's rules. Of course not, that's by design. Second of all, Malenia was designed the way she was because she needed to be designed that way to create the particular experience Miyazaki was trying to create. Let me explain. She's not gonna take it and stand there like a piñata for you to constantly poise and stance break her. Obviously, she will have her hyper armor modifications that are different than the omens and the snakes. Otherwise, you would equip your heaviest weapon and spam the attack button to always break her poise regardless of what she's doing. Miyazaki had purposefully designed Malenia to have a very low poise. But to balance that shortcoming, he made sure to have appropriate spacing and hyper armor modifications. Having low poise means she gets tripped up and staggered by even normal attacks. Unlike Crucible Knight, for instance, who has a very high poise resistance and never gets tripped up by attacks, this is Malenia's weakness. This is your cue to be as aggressive as possible. That's the inside of the dynamic. You need to take advantage of her very low poise by interrupting her attacks whenever she allows you to, and find those opportunities to fill up the posture bar to get your stance break. In fact, it is possible to posture break Malenia every 15 seconds with precise play and aggression. You don't have to do this, but you can do this. She was on her knees posture broken every 10 seconds. Believe it or not, the second phase has more chances for you to consistently pressure her than the first phase. But of course, to compensate, she's also more aggressive and lethal in the second phase. Regardless, this sort of play solves another problem people complain so much about: her ability to heal after each hit. If you're aggressive enough, she will never recover her HP fast enough in comparison to your attack power. Self-healing will never be a big issue, even if you make mistakes and get damaged here and there. Finally, let's address the waterfowl dance. I do understand the challenge of this move, and I also have my criticisms of it, but let's take a big picture view here. As long as you have 40, 50, 60 vigor, you don't have to do that circle around Malenia challenge runner trick, but instead you can still dodge it with precise play. You will have to tank some damage, but it's possible to survive, especially if you have the right talismans and armor. You can do a much easier and natural counter, which is simply running backwards and dodging into the second waterfowl and backwards for the third one. Now, if Malenia starts this attack very close to you and you don't have the time or the spacing to run backwards, yeah, there's not much you can do at this point. You can still run backwards and do a jump to circumvent the first waterfowl, but this is a very challenging technique that of course you're not going to be able to find blind your first playthrough. I get that. You need to accept that she might kill you here, especially if your health and stamina is not full. But I say that's precisely the point. You need to have such a grasp of the dynamics and flow of the fight that you should not have put yourself in such a risky position in the first place. You see, that's precisely why Malenia is the hardest From Software boss, as even when you understand her mechanics well enough, and you know what to do for the most part, she can still catch you off guard and put you in a corner. Unlike in Sekiro, where Ishin feels like a clockwork puzzle without any surprises after mastering him, Malenia is never like that. You always tremble and get excited a little bit facing her in the battlefield. It is never that formulaic or predictable, which is why Malenia...
Heed my words. I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella. And I have never known defeat.
In my opinion, is the best boss in Elden Ring's catalog, ranking at number 1 in my S+ tier segments. The Shadow of the Erdtree is not here as of yet, but it's very close. I will not only make a Let's Play on the channel, but also a boss tier list, just like this one for the DLC. To get notified when I release that video, don't forget to subscribe, and if you did enjoy this, please like this video and tell me your favorite Elden Ring bosses in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.